The appearance of AIDS, therefore, and the enormous increase in all forms of disease, cancer in particular, would have come as no surprise to Viktor Schauberger. Apart from the other inevitable disturbances to the ecology and the environment occasioned by humanity's unthinking activities, he foresaw it all as early as 1933. For a person who lives 100 years in the future, the present comes as no surprise. Apart from the other factors, some cannot be defined quantitatively, encompassing such aspects as turbidity, impurity, and quality. The most crucial factor affecting the health and energy of water is temperature. As a liquid, the behavior of water differs from all other fluids. The latter become consistently and steadily denser with cooling. Water reaches its densest state at a temperature of plus 4 degrees Celsius, below which it grows less dense. In contrast, water's behavior is anomalous because it reaches its greatest density at a temperature of plus 4 degrees Celsius. This is the so-called anomaly point, or the point of water's anomalous expansion, which is decisive in this regard and has a major influence on its quality. Below the temperature, it once more expands. The highest state of density is synonymous with its highest energy content, a factor to be taken carefully into account since energy can also be equated with life or life force. Therefore, if water's health, energy, and life force are to be maintained at the highest possible level, then certain precautions must be taken, which will be addressed later. Conceived in the cool, dark cradle of the virgin forest, water ripens and matures as it slowly mounts from the depths. On its upward way, it gathers to itself trace elements and minerals. Only when it is ripe and not before will it emerge from the womb of the earth as a spring. As a true spring, in contrast to a seepage spring, this has a water temperature of about plus 4 degrees Celsius. Here in the cool, diffused light of the forest, it begins its long, life-giving cycle as a sparkling, lively, translucent stream, bubbling, gurgling, whirling, and gyrating as it wends its way valleywards. In its natural self-cooling, spiraling, convoluting motion, water is able to maintain its vital inner energies, health, and purity. In this way, it acts as the conveyor of all the necessary minerals, trace elements, and other subtle energies to the surrounding environment. Naturally flowing water seeks to flow in darkness or in the diffused light of the forest, thus avoiding the damaging direct light of the sun. Under these conditions, even when cascading down in torrents, a stream will only rarely overflow its banks. Due to its correct natural motion, the faster it flows, the greater its carrying capacity and scouring ability, and the more it deepens its bed. This is due to the formation of in winding longitudinal, clockwise, anti-clockwise, alternating spiral vortices down the central axis of the current, which constantly cool and recool the water, maintaining it at a healthy temperature and leading to a faster, more laminar spiral flow. To protect itself from harmful effects of excess heat, water shields itself from the sun with overhanging vegetation, for with increasing heat and light, it begins to lose its vitality and health. Its capacity to enliven and animate the environment through which it passes, ultimately becoming a broad river, the water becomes more turbid, the content of small grain, sediment, and silt increasing as it warms up, its flow becoming slower and more sluggish. However, even this turbidity plays an important role because it protects the deeper water strata from the heating effect of the sun. Being in a denser state, the colder bottom strata retain the power to shift sediment of larger grain size from the center of the water course. In this way, the danger of flooding is reduced to a minimum. The spiral vertical motion mentioned earlier, which eventually led Viktor Schauberger to the formation of his theories concerning implosion, creates the conditions where the germination of harmful bacteria is inhibited and the water remains disease-free. Another of its life-giving properties is its high specific heat, lowest at plus 37.5 degrees Celsius. The term specific heat refers to the capacity and rapidity of a body to absorb or release heat. With a relatively small input of heat, fluids with a high specific heat warm up less rapidly than those with a lower specific heat. How strange then, and how remarkable, that the lowest specific heat of this inorganic substance, water, lies but 0.5 degrees Celsius above the normal plus 37 degrees Celsius blood temperature of the most highly evolved of nature's creatures, human beings. This property of water to resist rapid thermal change enables us, with blood composed of 80% water, to survive under large variations of temperature. Pure accident, so we are told, or is it by clever symbiotic design? However, we are used to thinking about temperature in gross terms. Car engines operate at temperatures of 1,000 degrees Celsius or so, and many industrial processes employ extremely high temperatures. Despite the fact that we begin to feel unwell if our temperature rises by as little as 0.5 degrees Celsius, we fail to see that non-mechanical organic life and health are based on very subtle differences in temperature. When our body temperature is plus 37 degrees Celsius, we do not have a temperature as such. We are healthy and in a state that Viktor Schauberger called indifferent or temperature-less. Just as good water is the preserver of our proper bodily temperature, our anomaly born of greatest health and energy, so too does it preserve this planet as a habitat for our continuing existence. Water has the capacity to retain large amounts of heat, and were there no water vapor in the atmosphere, this world of ours would be an icy, cold, barren wasteland. Water in all its forms and qualities is thus the mediator of all life and deserving of the highest focus of our esteem. To be or not to be. In nature, all life is a question of the minutest but extremely precisely graduated differences in the particular thermal motion within every single body, which continually changes in rhythm with the processes of pulsation. This unique law, which manifests itself through nature's fastness and unity, and expresses in every creature and organism, is the law of ceaseless cycles that in every organism is linked to a certain time span and a particular tempo. The slightest disturbance of this harmony can lead to the most disastrous consequences for the major life forms. In order to preserve this state of equilibrium, it is vital that the characteristic inner temperature of each of the million of microorganisms contained in the macroorganisms be maintained. The number one enemy of water is excess heat or overexposure to the sun's rays. It is a well-known fact that oxygen is present in all processes of organic growth and decay. Whether its energies are harnessed for either one or the other is to a very great extent, if not wholly, dependent on the temperature of the water as itself or in the form of blood or sap. As long as the water temperature is below plus 9 degrees Celsius, its oxygen content remains passive. Under such conditions, the oxygen assists in the building up of beneficial high-grade microorganisms and other organic life. However, if the water temperature rises above this level, then the oxygen becomes increasingly active and aggressive. The aggressiveness increases as the temperature rises, promoting the propagation of pathogenic bacteria, which, when drunk with the water, infest the organism of the drinker. Thus, the development of microorganisms and the opportunities for their propagation are simply a result of the condition in which the respective sickening macroorganism finds itself, which will be attacked by these parasites and which eventually must fall victim to them if its inner climatic conditions are no longer strictly regulated. But this aggressiveness is not conditioned to the domain of oxygen alone. When water becomes overheated due principally to the increasingly widespread clear felling of the forest, the health-maintaining pattern of longitudinal vortices changes into transverse ones. These not only undermine and gouge into the riverbanks and embankment works, eventually bursting them, but also create potholes in the riverbed itself, bringing even greater disorder to an already chaotic channel profile. According to Viktor Schauberger, water subjected to these conditions loses its character, its soul. Like humans of low character, it becomes increasingly violent and aggressive as it casts about hither and thither, seeking to vent its anger and restore to itself its former health and stability. However, due to the senseless malpractice of the clear felling of forests, we are destroying the very foundation of life. For with the removal of the forest, two very serious things happen. One, during its flow to the sea, the water warms up prematurely to such an extent that it is warmed right down to the channel bed. No cool, dense water strata remain, and the sediment is left lying in the bottom. This blocks the flow, dislocates the channel, and results in the inevitable, often catastrophic floods. Yet we still have the effrontery to call these awesome events natural disasters, as if nature herself were responsible. Furthermore, due to the broadening of the channel, even more water is exposed to the sun's heat, resulting in over-rapid evaporation to the atmosphere. In many cases, this overloads the atmosphere with water vapor, which it is unable to retain in suspension. Deluges follow. With the forest cover now removed, and the ground also begins to heat up to temperatures much higher than normal and natural. Dry soil heats up as much as 5 times faster than water. This has a twofold effect: the rejection and repulsion by the warmer soil of any incident rainwater, whose temperature in this case is generally lower. Cold rain will not readily infiltrate into warm soil. This results in rapid surface runoff and no groundwater recharge. The soil dries out. An increase in pathogenic microbial activity harmful to plant life. The upshot of all this is more flooding, reduced groundwater quantity, and lower groundwater table. One flood therefore begets the next in rapid succession, but since there is no groundwater recharge, the water balance and natural distribution are completely upset. The remaining trees, the vital retainers of water, die, leaving the land barren and desiccated with the necessary sequel of drought. The less the tree cover, the more extensive the flooding, and the longer the period of drought, of waterlessness, which is synonymous with lifelessness. Unnatural, quantity-inspired forestry practices, ignorant of nature's laws, and the overwarming of the soil arising from massive deforestation are the primary causes of the deterioration in water quality, climate, and the sinking of the water table. The channeling of water through straight, unnaturally constructed trapezoid canals, steel pipelines, and other misguided systems of river regulation also force the water to move in an unnatural way and accelerates degeneration and increase its disease-carrying capacity. All around us we see the bridges of life collapsing, those capillaries which create all organic life. This dreadful disintegration has been caused by the mindless and mechanical work of man, who has wrenched the living soul from the earth's blood, water. The more the engineer endeavors to channel water, of whose spirit and nature he is today still ignorant, by the shortest and straightest route to the sea, the more the flow of the water weighs into the bends, the longer its path, and the worse the water will become. The spreading of the most terrible disease of all, cancer, is the necessary consequence of such unnatural regulatory works. These mistaken activities outwork must legitimately lead to increasingly widespread unemployment because our present methods of working, which have a purely mechanical basis, are already destroying not only all of wise nature's forma 5 processes, but first and foremost the growth of the vegetation itself, which is being destroyed even as it grows. The drying up of mountain springs, the change in the whole pattern of motion of the groundwater, and the disturbance in the blood circulation of the organism earth is the direct result of modern forestry practices. The pulse heat of the earth was factually arrested by the modern timber production industry. Every economic death of a people is always preceded by the death of its forests. The forest is the habitat of water, and as such the habitat of life processes too, whose quality declines as the organic development of the forest is disturbed. Ultimately, due to a law which functions with awesome constancy, it will slowly but surely come around to our turn. Our accustomed way of thinking in many ways, and perhaps even without exception, is opposed to the true workings of nature. Our work is the embodiment of our will. The spiritual manifestation of this work is its effect. When such work is carried out correctly, it brings happiness, but when carried out incorrectly, it assuredly brings misery. There is only one solution. Would we live and ensure a sustainable future, then we must plant trees for our very lives, but far more importantly, we have a duty to do it for those of our children. More immediately, however, we must care for the very limited stocks of water still available. This means treating it in the way demonstrated to us by nature. First and foremost, water should be protected from sunlight and kept in the dark, far removed from all sources of heat, light, and atmospheric influences. Ideally, it should be placed in opaque, porous containers, which, on the one hand, cut out all the direct light and heat, on the other, allow the water to breathe, which, in common with all other living things, it must do in order to stay alive and healthy. In terms of what we can achieve personally, we should at all times ensure that our storage vessels, tanks, etc., are thoroughly insulated so that the contained water is maintained at the coolest temperature possible under the prevailing conditions. The materials most suited to this are natural stone, timber, and terracotta. Perhaps more than any other material, terracotta has been used for this purpose for millennia. Terracotta exhibits a porosity particularly well suited to purposes of water storage. This is because it enables a very small percentage of the contained water to evaporate via the vessel walls. Evaporation is always associated with cooling. Vaporization, however, with heat, and according to Walter Schauberger, Viktor's physicist son, if the porosity is correct, then for every 600th part of the contents evaporated, the contents will be cooled by 1 degree Celsius, thus approaching a temperature of plus 4 degrees Celsius. While the material for the construction of a water storage vessel has been described above, another important factor is the actual shape of the container itself. Most of the storage containers commonly in use today take the form of cubes, rectangular volumes of one form or another, or cylinders. While these are the shapes most easily and economically produced by today's technology, they do have certain drawbacks in terms of impeding natural water circulation and water suffocation. Due to their rectangular shape and/or right-angle corners, certain stagnant zones are created, conducive to the formation of pathogenic bacteria. Moreover, since the materials used are generally galvanized iron, fiberglass, concrete, etc., all impervious materials, the contained water is unable to breathe adequately and suffocates as a result. In this debilitated state, or as a water corpse, it is no longer either healthy or health-giving and may require further disinfection. Should we now make a study of those shapes that nature chooses to propagate and maintain life, it soon becomes apparent that the cubes and cylinders mentioned above have no place in nature's scheme of things. Instead, eggs and elongated egg shapes, such as grains and seeds, are employed, presumably because nature, in her wisdom, has determined that these produce the optimal results. Historically speaking, it is evident that earlier civilizations, such as the Egyptians and Greeks, renowned for their logic and constructional ability, were well aware of this because they stored their grains and liquids in terracotta amphorae, sealed with beeswax. All this despite the fact that for all rational, practical purposes, the shape was wholly unsuited to compact and efficient storage in terms of space and ease of handling. It is obvious that the selection of this form over any other was intentional and as the result of certain knowledge of the long-term storage properties of such shapes. In many amphorae that have surfaced in archaeological excavations over the last 100 years or so, grains of wheat have been found that were still viable and even after storage over 2,000 years, grew when planted. The fact alone should suffice to affirm the efficacy of the properties of vessels of such shape. Taking Viktor Schauberger's exhortation, comprehend and copy nature, as our guide, we should therefore make use of the shapes that nature herself selects to contain, guard, and maintain life. Eggs and their derivations. Compared with cubes and cylinders, these shapes have no stagnant zones, no right-angled corners that inhibit flowing movement. By placing our terracotta vessels in shaded areas exposed to air movement, the evaporative cooling effect will be significantly enhanced, and since all natural movement of liquids and gases is triggered by differences in temperature,